Hello, happy Friday, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to the Intentional Conversations VodCast. We're so excited you're here. We have been expecting you. And let me tell you, if you are not already in a mode of having this great high energy, then you need to find it because this conversation is going to be amazing today. And I can't wait for you to meet our guest co-host. But as we normally do, I just want to take an opportunity to greet each of you, welcome you into this space. Feel free to use the chat to let us know where you're joining the conversation from. We always love to be able to know where people are joining the conversation from. And also, if you feel inclined to let us know your LinkedIn information, we always like to make sure we can connect with each other even beyond this hour of time. We don't take it lightly that you found it appropriate to align your schedule to be with us today for this live conversation. And so we want to know where you're joining us from. Nashville, Tennessee is in the house. Antonio, hi, Antonio. Greenville, South Carolina, my hometown, which is where NWC is headquartered. We have Oklahoma in the house, Dallas, Texas in the house. Greetings, everyone. We have enabled closed captions, so if that's something that's of use to you, then I want you to be aware that it is available. This is our way at NWC of valuing the importance of disability justice, and so we want to make sure we call your attention to that. It is also Black History Month. I like to refer to it as Black Heritage Month, so I certainly want to acknowledge that. You probably can't see my shirt, but I'm wearing a Black Excellent shirt for that purpose. And I'm hoping each of you are finding some moments of joy as you are engaged in different activities that are taking place relevant to Black History Month. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started because I'm telling y'all there's going to be so much great information that's going to be shared today. So let's jump right in. And I'll first start with ensuring that we all are appropriately welcomed into this VodCast space. Great. So again, this is Intentional Conversations VodCast. I am Dr. Nika White, founder and lead principal consultant for NWC. I am being supported today by a number of colleagues with NWC. I appreciate them. This is a big production. It takes a lot of effort to pull this off week after week. And so I'm always grateful for the support of the team. I always like to share a little bit of information before we jump into having a conversation with our guest co-host. For those of you who were with us last week, we are celebrating 5 years. Yay, 5. That is a big milestone for us. And we want our VodCast community to also be able to celebrate with us. And so yay, 5-year that NWC has been in existence. And we're super excited about that milestone. Now, we cannot do this without the help of this community. And so many of the guest co-hosts that we're able to bring on to share and to drop nuggets and bring the fire, it is because they are individuals that you have recommended. So if you know of someone that you think will bring tremendous value to this VodCast community, we would love for you to provide us with that information. You can send it to Courtney at nikawhite.com. Courtney Perry is on today. She loves those recommendations, and it helps us to ensure that we're also connecting with content and individuals that you find of interest to this broader conversation of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we also like to remind you that we produce a lot of content. This is our way of showing up for the broad community of leaders who really want to deepen their understanding and knowledge of diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just in theory, but most importantly in practice. So with that in mind, every week we produce new content. It's known as a short video clip called Inclusion Uncomplicated, Simplify DEI. And we hope that you will subscribe to our YouTube channel to make sure that you're connected with all of those nuggets that we like to share as we each deepen, again, our knowledge and understanding of this work. And so next week, we have another wonderful guest co-host that's going to be joining. Her name is Dr. Teresa White. And yes, there is a relationship there. I'll wait and tell you about it next week. But she is going to be joining us for the Intentional Conversation VodCast. And we're going to be discussing serving diverse families, specifically families with children that have special needs as it relates to their learning abilities. And so she's going to educate us on that. And I can't wait for that conversation because I know that many of us could certainly benefit from hearing all that she has to share. And then the week following, we have none other than Brittany Janae Harris joining us, and we're going to be discussing who we are as DEI practitioners and those that have influenced us as we show up for this work. I'm going to so enjoy that conversation. One of my favorite questions whenever I partner with anyone relevant to the work that we do in this space is, what's your DEI story? What are those intersecting identities that helps you to show up to this work in the way that you do? So can't wait to talk with Brittany Janae Harris. Now, last but not least, it gives me great pleasure to do as I normally do. This audience is familiar with it. I love to give a formal introduction to our guest co-host, and then I will bring him on to be able to greet you in his own way. And here we go. John Graham's professional passion is helping global companies uncover who they are at their core. Through award-winning employer brand and employee value proposition development, Graham has discovered innovative ways to bring the humanity of employee stories to life. As a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner and culture transformation consultant, his work centers on improving the lived experiences of marginalized employee populations through bleeding-edge approaches that disrupt the status quo and create equitable and inclusive environments. Graham earned a bachelor's degree in African Studies and a master's degree in education from Lincoln University. He holds an executive certificate in fostering diversity and inclusion from the Yale School of Management. John is also the best-selling author of Plantation Theory, The Black Professional Struggle Between Freedom and Security. And y'all know we're going to dig into that today. So VodCast community, you know the drill. Help me in your own way to welcome our phenomenal guest co-host today, John Graham Jr. I'm going to put that Jr. in there as well. That's important. You can either share your sentiments of welcoming into the chat or use some of the features in Zoom, but let's make John feel welcome to this community today. John, how are you?
Hello, hello. I'm amazing in this moment. Nika, thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you so much for being
welcome.
here. Yes, welcome. So John, one of the things that we like to do here is one of our first questions is we've read your bio, we've shared a little bit about your experience, your accolades, your credentials, why you're greatly qualified to be here speaking as a voice of authority on this topic. But now we want you to tell us something that we don't know about you and that we could not know by reading your bio. Help us to get a deeper connection to John Graham Jr. Go for it.
Absolutely. No pressure. So what most people don't know from reading my bio is that I was a former recording artist, hip hop recording artist. And so I thought that the means of connecting history and positive perspectives through hip hop was the pathway to getting the voice out there. Little did I know it was simply the groundwork being laid for what I now do today. And so hip hop recording artist by night, opted not to sign a label deal, worked in corporate by day, and then started my own company, Social Digital Strategy. It's a winding road, as they say. The path has not been linear.
I love that. So let me tell you, so did your corporate colleagues, did they know what your side gig was? Or maybe it was your main gig. I've heard some people say, you know what, my employer thinks that my 9 to 5 is my main gig, but no, my side hustle is my main gig.
How about that?
Just share with us, but did folks know this was something that you were also connected to and doing?
Yeah, some did for sure. You know, I mean, this was pre many platforms. So I mean, we're talking 2008, 2009. So Twitter, I think, had like 20 million monthly actives at the time versus like the 500 million monthly they have now. So I got in, I think, at the front end of social as it relates to music. So, you know, those who were social media active, they caught wind. I still shared CDs at the time. It was, you know, there were some folks who definitely knew.
Did you sell them out the trunk of your car? I want to ask, did you?
I didn't do trunk. I always, you know, in true fashion, I used tech as cutting edge. So what I did was
love it.
Put the albums on USB wristbands that were branded.
Oh, yeah.
So that was.
So you were sophisticated with it. I love it.
I mean, I had to stand out. Yeah.
No, that's great. Fantastic. Well, thanks for
Right.
sharing that little slice of life with us so we know a little bit more than what's on paper. So
Yeah.
I want to jump right in. It is Black History Month, as I've mentioned, and there are a lot of brands that are being criticized for getting it wrong. Surprise,
Hmm.
surprise, right? But I want to flip the script here and I want to talk about this. Who do you see doing it right, if any? If any, give us some hope. Who do you see doing it right and what's right about how they're doing it?
It's a fantastic question. I think, and interestingly, at the beginning of the month, I hosted a conversation on Clubhouse with the title was Black History Month. Whose celebration is this? And so, I think this year we've pressed, even within our own community, about, who are we celebrating Black history for when it's in the, auspices of a corporate environment, right? And so you see the scramble, like January 15th, right after MLK Day, and companies are trying to figure out what are they doing for Black History Month, and in a few weeks. And so that pressure starts to come where you're like, we need programming and so forth, but then you're like, but who's benefiting from this? And I think it's a question that's really been asked this year. So, I'm glad to see that more Black ERGs, more Black communities within corporations are defining how they want to celebrate Black History Month and not letting it simply be a one-way value proposition, whereas the company gets reputation boosts and
Right.
can showcase all the performative things.
Yeah, I think that people are definitely exhausted by what's feeling very performative.
For sure.
One of the things I just wrote a article for Entrepreneur Magazine, and I talked about Black History Month. And one of the things that I'm seeing is that a lot of organizations, well-intended, they are placing the burden on their Black employees to execute a way to celebrate them, right? And I'm like, oh, that's a little backwards now, right? It's like, well, we have a Black, ERG, employee resource group. Let's let them kind of plan the Black History Month, gathering or celebration. And yes, I do think that they need to be consulted. They need to have voice around what that looks like so that it can be meaningfully executed. But if you're placing the burden on them, it's like planning your own birthday party, right?
With no budget and constraints.
There you go, with no budget, with nothing, right?
And you get parameters of how far you can go based on the levels of comfort by those who are giving you that budget.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where, again, we need to define our relationship within these spaces for sure.
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump into this book, Plantation Theory. So I would imagine, and I'm just guessing here, I would imagine that some people may even just hear the title, see the title and think, I'm not going there because I'm too afraid. And I'm sure that you knew that as you drafted that as your title. But let's unpack Plantation Theory, and we do have a link placed into the chat for those who are not familiar with your book. But what inspired it? What is it about, and why is it important?
Yes. So aside from the shocking scroll-stopping headline of Plantation Theory, the subtext, I think, is where the focus is, right? Which is the Black professional struggle between freedom and security. That subtext came about because in the wake of George Floyd's murder, I was still in a corporate role in the biotech space, and I saw conversations happening that had never happened in corporate. Black folks sharing their professional and personal stories of encounters of racism, brutality, run-ins with police, you name it. And what I saw, again, I'm a historian by education. What I saw was this connection to something that I knew from back in my days at Lincoln, and that was, that we had such brilliance, such excellence, high credentialed, hardworking, outstanding performers in roles that were limiting their abilities to go beyond what they could, what they say they could do on paper and what they were allowed to do by their leadership. And so I knew several folks within these spaces who easily could be running the companies they worked at. Connecting that back to history, I knew that in 1866, there were 4.5 million newly freed Black folks post-emancipation. And in the first year, over 1.2 million died due to starvation, due to disease and neglect. And so that's because we were emancipated into no safety nets, right? No viable jobs, no guaranteed residency, and now you have to compete for work with an influx of immigrants coming in from Europe to backfill these roles, to backfill this loss of free labor, I should say, and then also competing with those who formerly enslaved you. So I say all that to say, 1.2 million die. A very small population migrates elsewhere around the country or outside of the country, sets up free lives and lives, happily ever after, so as it may seem. But the majority went back to plantations in what would, for the next 100 years, set up, peonage, black codes, and a second-class citizenry existence, not free from terror and certainly not in control of one's own labor and outcomes. That connection between our history and modern day lived experience in corporate birthed the title. And so the idea to capture our stories and our voices, my own family history of work and the relationship to work, and the history that ultimately most of us aren't taught. Unless you go deeper into these subjects in a secondary school or postgraduate work.
Yeah, and John, I appreciate that your personal convictions do not cause you to shy away from the historical context. I know so many people feel like, let's just move forward. Why do we have to keep living in the past? And I'm like, historical context has important value to how in which we can correct the wrongs and try to prevent ourselves from being in this vicious cycle that just continues over and over again. So I love the fact that you are willing to go there. And as we were talking earlier today in preparation for going live at the top of the hour, I said, I want you to co-create this experience with me. I want you to feel the liberty to take this conversation where you have energy around and passion for. So again, I say that live to this audience because I do believe in centering people's voices in ways that feel comfortable to them, especially when they're invited to do so. So what about plantation theory? Some of those nuggets, not giving it all away because I want people to get the book, right? Get the book. But what are some of those nuggets that you feel like are foundational to the takeaways you want people to have when they are exposed to this book?
Well, there's a few. The book kicks off with a foreword by Dr. Joy DeGruy, who is the well-known author in spaces of post-traumatic slave syndrome. And I'm fortunate that she wrote that foreword, but it starts you off on a pathway very clearly setting the intention of what you're about to read. We get into everything from code switching, which is an opener and a story of my 7-year-old daughter asking my wife a jaw-dropping question of why does she change her voice when she calls the doctor or calls the school? And what we then have to have a conversation about at 7 years old. But there's some bigger themes here, and first and foremost, this when my publisher asked me who is the intended audience, and I said, well, it's for the Black professional, right, to embody the voice of those who have largely felt afraid to speak vocally about the things that we universally experience. But additionally, it's also for somebody who is in a power dominant position of privilege and access, who can make decisions on somebody's outcomes or careers, to understand a perspective that they otherwise would have very little exposure to from people that they work with every day. And so I challenge Black folks specifically to question the premises we've been sold, i.e., and we talked a little bit about this, i.e., go to school, get a degree, graduate, get a good job, work 30 years, retire and die, right? That's a premise that we've been sold for an operating system that largely is outdated.
Right.
And so now I suggest, what would it look like to reevaluate your relationships with work, with an abusive relationship that is? I challenge people to ask better questions, especially DEI leaders.
Yeah.
Right now, I think we're in a phase of DEI 2.0 where we're doing doctor's office DEI. And by that, I mean, you go to the doctor because you have symptoms. The doctor does an examination, but not the deepest examination that could be done provides you a prescription and sends you on your way. But you never got to the underlying root cause of the illness. There needs to be a thorough examination. I'm talking CT scans, MRIs, biopsies, evaluations of the underlying. And so, like I said, I'm connecting the dots between history and modern day lived experience. So where we've started at what and jumped to how, taking us back to why, so that our what has a better perspective, and then our how is more informed.
I love that. There's this practice of asking questions, following your curiosity, and then there is this notion of interrogation. We really are getting to the crux of the matter. We're peeling back all the layers, identifying those root causes that are issues that are compromising diversity, equity, and inclusion, justice, belonging, and that's where we start to solve for it, not the surface approach. I love that. I love that. I'm with you, Anne. Anne placed into the chat, doctor's office DEI. I'm going to use that 100%. Me too, Anne. Me too.
Sure.
But I think that's so critical. So explain how Black individuals' unhealthy association with work is rooted in our history and white supremacy. You certainly touched on that, but let's go deeper.
So first I'll say for everybody, I don't use the term white supremacy. I use the term white insecurity. And that's rooted in a historical understanding that colonialism was founded in insecurity, propelled by use of Chinese gunpowder technology. But we'll get into this. When I say insecurity, and this will tie back into the question you've asked, centuries of food insecurity, resource insecurity, health insecurities with plagues, famines, political and religious crime was rampant in European countries. And so this bred a culture, embedded a culture of scarcity mindset, right? Fear, insecurity. I have an equation: insecurity plus fragility equals rage. And what happens is when you expand out and you see cultures that are abundant in resources, they have their own issues, but there's an aggression that is reinforced by the ability to dominate and exterminate, that now builds a colonial construct that hoards resources to protect and cover for insecurities. This still pervades all the way today. So when we talk about the unhealthy relationship with work, we also have to examine the fact that if you are a Black American descendant of slaves or enslaved people, you were brought here specifically to work. Right? You were brought to the Americas, the Caribbean, South America, to work. So that relationship was defined by a colonial construct that, again, still exists today. Why so? Well, the intent of any business is to make profit. Doing so by having the lowest cost or overhead expenses, and labor being an expense, with the highest amount of productivity. No different than today. So our relationship to work was defined by how it started, which was you have to work twice, 3 times as hard as anybody else on the planet to achieve a high output, right? Your value was determined by your productivity and output. Still happens today. Now, the challenge here is we've become, and by we, I say Black professionals, believe that our credentials, our excellence and work output determines how high we go. And that's not the case. We're coded for excellence in a construct built on mediocrity. And that epigenetic coding is passed down through values, beliefs, right? Don't let them see you sweat. Put your head down, keep working, they'll tap you. Meritocracy, all of these things that we're led to believe as the means of advancement don't play out because there's a different game being played. And there's a difference between owner class and labor class mindset. Everything from education and indoctrination from youth to media to political and legislative policy, all of these things influence those mindsets. So I suggest we need to reevaluate our relationship to work. Is the goal to advance in a system where you don't own and control the output of your labor? Or should the goal be, or should we shift our mindsets to stop making white spaces safe for Black folks and just create
Right.
more Black spaces.
Yeah. So much to unpack with that. So many deep nuggets. I'm trying to think, where do I go with that? I mean, the whole scarcity mindset, and then, this whole notion of trying to be superhuman when really that's not how we're wired. And when we go after trying to be superhuman, what we don't realize is that sometimes it's costing us our lives.
That's right.
Literally.
That's right.
Black
Well,
folks, when we think about some of the health issues that we succumb to, it has a lot to do with us trying to work our fingers to the bones to try to be superhuman, because we think that's what the world requires of us in order for us to have just a fair chance. And I'm feeling all of what you're sharing.
it's real. It's real. And I know it's heavy. It's heavy to think about, because these aren't the things that we discuss openly. These aren't the things that we're taught, right? This requires a deeper examination again. So, who does it benefit for us to work twice as hard?
Yeah.
If you're in an existing corporate scenario or any, even academia, our twice as hard output, we believe is an asset. But what you highlighted is that it shows a spotlight on somebody else's ineptitudes.
Right.
Typically, those people who are spotlighted are in decision-making positions, i.e. they control your performance review, which controls
Right.
your compensation, or your latitude within an organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I really am not a fan of trying to help people be more comfortable in abusive relationships. I'm an encourager of people to leave those abusive relationships and find what life would look like in a different reality.
That is so good. As I think about the scarcity mindset, I think also another way that it harms us, particularly as Black people of color, anyone that finds themselves under systems of oppression, is that we believe that the pathway to success is so narrow that sometimes we're less inclined to help others along the way, bring others up, because we're like, I got to get mine. What is it? The whole kind of crab in the bucket type, analogy.
Right.
And again, that internalized oppression can also create adverse, impact that I think that we need to try to address. And so there's so much to be said for what you're sharing with us today, John.
You're not wrong. You're absolutely spot on in the sense that it's internalized because that's what we're told is required to be successful.
Yeah.
I don't blame people for adapting to the construct they're in to achieve some level of success and security. I get that.
Yeah.
However, when you become aware that there's a cost for the climb, right?
Yeah.
You have a decision to make. How much of you are you willing to give up, right? They say, come as you are, bring your whole self to work.
Mm-hmm.
But that's only if your whole self mirrors what success and leadership and power look like.
Yeah, no, that's so true. So I've seen some people kind of use language like bring your best self to work. And I think that's kind of code for saying your best self is when it aligns with dominant culture, centers whiteness and yeah.
Objective. Who defines best?
Yeah.
What measure are we using, right? I've often said diversity, equity, and inclusion still centers cisgendered, able-bodied white men.
Yeah, you're right.
Diversity requires a standard to be diverse from. Equity requires somebody giving something up, and inclusion means somebody accepting you.
Yeah. Okay. Wait, say that again. Rewind that. Rewind that for us. I also want to capture this into the chat. Y'all, this is so good. Rewind that for us, John.
So diversity, equity, and inclusion still centers cisgendered, able-bodied white men.
Right.
In that diversity requires a standard to be measured against to showcase diverse from. Equity requires somebody giving something up, right, to level a playing field, to be equitable. And inclusion requires somebody to accept you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So
and I think that's why
deficit premise.
And I think that's why so many people have a challenge with the equity piece. And when I say so many people, specifically, I'm talking about usually like the white men who don't understand it. And it is because, and I think that we do a disservice as DEI practitioners by not being very clear to say, yes, sometimes it could be that you are having to give something up to make way for others, right?
That's right.
And so it's a hard concept that I think that it's creating challenges for people to really be able to lean into it to where now they're actualizing practicing it, right? Changing systems so that really equity can be actualized.
That's the dream.
Yeah.
That is the
That's the
dream.
dream. Yeah, that's the dream. So by the way, cameras are not at all required for our vodcast. We do love smiling faces. So if your camera is off and you want to turn those cameras on, we certainly welcome you to do so. We're going to be shifting in just a moment. We do want to give you an opportunity to unmute yourself and present your questions directly. Or if you are maybe a little more on the shy side or just don't want to socialize your question out loud, you can share it into the chat and we will make sure that it's brought to the conversation. I want to continue on just a little bit further.
Sure.
Why are we coded for excellence, but our white counterparts are not?
It's simple economics. Again, we address the productivity measure of success in a capitalist construct. I think what a lot of people, there's a really good book called Slavery in the Antebellum South by Kenneth M. Stamp that really lays out the environment, the societal implications of a fully functioning enslaved labor model. And I think when you look at racism, that a lot of people look at racism as this independent thing. Racism was a required offshoot for the colonial model to work, right? And the colonial model started first and foremost with a dominant ownership of controlled resource, and then selling that to market, right? So, sugar became what it was to the world because it was an addictive substance that monarchies couldn't live without. So now they created enterprise to ensure a consistent flow of sugar. Coffee and tobacco, addictive substances that then required infrastructure to be set up to ensure that there was a consistent market and profitable ownership of those resources. So there's, enslavement was a means to an economic end. Racism was a requirement to ensure that the construct never stopped. Right. And so this is encoding for excellence. When you look at a book called American Slave Coast, and the author's name slipped me right now, but they talk about Virginia being a production house, right? A breeding state, right? Because tobacco wasn't thriving against cotton or other cash crops in the States. So Virginia turned to breeding enslaved people post 1808 ban on importation. How do you still have a thriving enslaved class if you can't bring them over from source? Yeah. You have to breed. So that now starts to create different attributes. Right? These are the gritty things of history that we don't think about. Just as you bred animals to get certain outcomes, they bred different African tribes to get certain outcomes. There's this concept of the super Negro that comes from cross-pollination, right? Cross-intermingling to produce certain outcomes. It's no accident that we have an NFL and an NBA. Not an accident. Yeah. So I mean, these are some of the ugly things that we don't think about within the enterprises of today, because there's been a multi-billion-dollar veneer laid on top through marketing, branding,
It's been camouflaged.
That's right. That's right.
And put into the chat timely. Yes, we know Super Bowl's coming up. So mention of the NFL, and I won't even go there. Let me just stop there. I won't even go there.
Yes, that's a whole nother.
I know John has top of mind, but I have top of mind, but we won't shift there because we'll stay there and we will probably never move off of it. So let's keep moving. Okay. So we've painted this bleak picture. Not that we've painted it, but we've amplified it because it's the truth. It's real. It has great historical context. But what do we do about it? How do we pivot our focus now to owning, controlling, and profiting from our labor? What does that look like?
Yeah. So I think it's first and foremost examining and acknowledging the picture that is, right? It could be bleak, but yes, I think they say ignorance is bliss for a reason. They say the truth will set you free, but also the truth hurts in the same breath. So it comes down to decisions. We are working against 600 years of coded behaviors on many sides. So it starts small. I love Dr. Claude Anderson's work. around what would it look, his 5-point platform for Black self-sufficiency. First and foremost, it starts with community. And we use this word loosely when we say Black community, but there are requirements within a community to truly be a competitor in the race. Black American community, and even in the diaspora, lacks this communal obligation to each other, right? Playing on the same team for the benefit and competition of others, against others. So that starts there. Then you have economic control, then you have political control, media control, and education control. We have examples and pockets of success in those areas, but not that matriculate to a communal benefit. Mm-hmm. And so it starts with small choices. Personal example, we opted to pull our children out of school and homeschool because they were 2 Black children out of a total of 4 in a population of 472. They were never going to get the exposure to their culture that we could provide. Right. And there was no onus on the education system to adapt based on majority. So, right. So now we have control of the education or the indoctrination process that is passing along values, beliefs, and positive imagery and representation, in addition to the core elements of education. Financial literacy. We have to be very intimately aware of how our finances work. What is, our relationship of consumerism and consumption as it relates to filling voids that have been placed for centuries of denial of access, denial of independent decision-making and free will, right? All of those things. So there's a lot. I mean, we can't solve a 600-year-old problem by Q4 of next year, right? But we have to start with small decisions that take us in different directions.
Yeah, we have to start. And you've given us just a few really important ideas that I think some of us in this community today can start maybe actualizing and considering. So again, we want you to have an opportunity to share your questions. You can submit them either by the chat or use the raise hand feature, and we will use that as a sign that you're willing to present your question or your comments directly. I have one more question before I will turn it over for this audience to present their thoughts and contributions. But that is, what would your day look like if you made decisions through the lens of a healthy Black psychology rather than white psychology? You talk about this a lot, and I want you to help educate us on that.
Yes, I'll give you 2 really cogent examples, and I'll ask this to the audience. When I say a good neighborhood, what are some of the attributes of a good neighborhood? If I say a good school, what are some of the attributes of a good school?
Yeah, place them in the chat. Let's see what you're thinking.
See what you're thinking.
Good neighborhood and a good school.
Yes. No crime. Okay. That's number 1.
Oh.
Right. Rochelle went right.
Yeah. She went right to it, right?
Like, well kept. Good neighborhood. Okay. What about good schools? White picket fences, indeed.
Well funded.
Police, well funded. Expensive cars, clean. Yes. Okay.
New books and resources. Andrea sent that to me directly. New books and resources.
Yeah, dedicated teachers. So thank you for that participation, and all of those things are certainly what default come to mind. Did anybody think about Black schools, Black neighborhoods?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what's interesting. I think it's Valerie. She put Black teachers, and I was like, that's refreshing. We didn't see that in some of the other responses.
Zip code. Yes. No, this is real. While you have time to think about it, right? Your automatic responses are what we're looking at. How do we define success? What does good look like? These are largely shaped by a Eurocentric psychology.
Yeah.
Deeply ingrained, deeply implanted and reinforced for the entirety of our lives. You have to make active interruptive decisions to introduce new versions and new examples of what good looks like. And it doesn't mean flipping to the opposite, right? You can have balance. I think the goal is to achieve a level of balance, but it starts with, where do you choose to live? Who do you choose to engage with and interact with? Who's in your close circle? What values are being exchanged at schools? A lot of times we think teacher student, but most times the values that are passed on are from student to student. You send your kids out, they come home with values, beliefs, and behaviors that you didn't send them out with. And it's not because the teachers instilled that, it's because their peer groups do. So what values, beliefs, and behaviors are they now subject to that they then take onto their own in these critically developmental stages? So these are ways that we start to think about life through a Black psychology. How do you view Black? What areas are you afraid to go to and why?
Yeah, no, that's so good, John. That's so good. Okay, so I want to bring in some voices from this amazing audience. And I know that my friend Katrina has placed a lot of good commentary into the chat. So Katrina, I want to bring you on and into the conversation. So I'm going to spotlight you now. And thanks so much for being here.
No, I'm glad I could join, and thank you for having me in this conversation. I have to tell you, I have enjoyed all of this. I've been live tweeting some highlights from it. This is necessary listening for Black professionals and for DEI practitioners. As a DEI practitioner and somebody who's been in the HR space for 15 years, you know, I really appreciate what you're sharing and challenging us about the work and the work that we're doing and about who is centered in that work.
Indeed. Indeed. I commend you for surviving 15 years in HR. I've spent time there.
Yes.
It is a hostile environment for sure.
It is. And I think, you know, just on that, we have to ask ourselves why, and this is what you're getting at, is who are these standards for? Who were they set on?
That's
The
right.
standards around professionalism, the standards around quote unquote, and John, you know this, risk management, right?
Oh, my favorite. My favorite.
Yes.
Indeed.
Yes.
Ooh, you're bringing up the things.
And what I've experienced and seen is that the very presence of someone who is not like the others, the very presence of Black people is a risk in an environment.
So you are 1000% correct. And I'm glad you brought this up. You started by saying who's centered. A lot of the questions I ask executives who are showcasing intent to go down a DEI path, first question I ask is who are the intended beneficiaries, right? You're about to commit dollars and resources, headcount, a lot of performative statements, magnanimous commitments. Who are the intended beneficiaries? They'll stop, they'll pause, they'll think, and then they'll come back with a statement like everybody. Mm-hmm. To which I say, everybody's not marginalized, so let's try it. You have data that showcases, right? And then that's one thing. I love that you brought up risk mitigation. I've often said the final frontier of DEI is in legal departments.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. The first Civil Rights Act of 1964 was legislative. We're talking laws and policies. DEI is not just feel-good work. Mm-hmm. In some circles, we suggest that it's teaching white executives to be human again. It's an uncomfortable statement, but you have to realize the level of disconnect from humanity that's required to make certain decisions. Who here could fire 10,000 people just to balance out their P&L?
Yeah.
Without thinking about it, because that's what's expected. Who here can make some of these decisions to put manufacturing in countries that use children as labor? Yeah. There's some disconnects from humanity. DEI is more than just an emotional work.
Yeah.
It's also legal and policy, because no company is required to go beyond the bare minimum legal standard of showcasing a good faith effort towards diversity, equity, inclusion. Mm-hmm. Anything else is a risk.
Yeah. Look, you're singing my song, and I will give the floor back, but I just want to say progress is not going to come without those policy interventions. Mm-hmm. But when everybody is talking about and wondering why we have not made the progress over all of these years that we've been pouring into DEI within corporations, within organizations, it's because there is no mandate. And when you are leaving it up to the goodwill of people, change is not going to come. We would not have ended busing or segregation in schools in the public without a legal mandate. It would have persisted. That's what's required.
So we're certainly singing from the same hymnal then. I often say that DEI doesn't work without consequences, right?
Yeah,
There is no consequence if DEI fails.
absolutely.
Who gets fired if a middle manager fails to adopt the inclusive culture behaviors they've just been trained on? Nobody.
The black guy person does.
Well, there's the scapegoat plus the excellence code,
yeah.
right? Yeah, and
Mhm.
that's real. But until there's a consequence, behaviors only change through carrot and stick.
Yeah.
It's human psychology. If there's no consequence or reward, behavior status quo remains.
Yeah, that's where that accountability mechanisms have to come in. And that's where I find that a lot of organizations are really challenged by. They say, yes, we support it and we want to encourage others to, but we don't have to go that far, do we? You know,
Well,
consequences? Yes, absolutely you do.
Nika, I dare say, what does accountability mean to you?
Mm,
There's a linguistic disconnect.
that's
And
good, John.
I've asked Black ERGs, white executives in the same space, what does that one word mean to you? It means something very different across racial realities.
Yeah.
We see accountability as ownership, admission of guilt, wrongdoing, corrective action to repair harm. Accountability on the other side means negotiation so as not to sully my reputation in public. Look at it throughout history. General Lee negotiated the conditions of his surrender for treasonous activity. Jefferson Davis's cabinet was largely reinstated back into the Congress of the US. They were able to negotiate without having to accept or admit guilt. Any CEO scandal that goes on today, they step down, maybe pay a fine, but they do not have to admit guilt. It's built into the legal paperwork. So we have very different expectations of what accountability means based on language that we still don't speak the same.
No, that is so good. And I think I'm going to start shifting when I'm talking about the accountability mechanism. I like the distinction between accountability and consequences. So yeah, John, you're teaching today. Thank you so much, Katrina. I appreciate you sharing and contributing to the conversation. And VodCast community, stay tuned because Katrina is going to be an upcoming guest. We're working on scheduling that now. So glad to have you today as well. Okay, so I want to bring some other voices to the conversation. I see there's a hand up. So go ahead and unmute yourself and share.
Okay, I have a hand up. Hello, everyone. I want to say you mentioned a point earlier about escaping an abusive relationship versus surviving in it.
That's right.
When you're in an abusive relationship, we're in this Eurocentric dynamic environment where we have to buy houses, go to banks, go to schools, educate our children. Everything we do, gotta work. How can you escape it fully? And I don't even think it's fair to ask you that only. I'm just putting it out there because really, we have to sometimes learn how to function in a dysfunctional situation. It's in regards to this topic, in regards to sometime in familial situations, anytime there's a dictator or bully of a circumstance and you're not able to escape it fully, you do have to use your language in a way that won't get you beat up or that will help you live another day. So even if you don't fully believe it, like so when you speak on accountability, you're right, I know what accountability means. But if I'm in a setting where I'm trying to get some result, I may not be able to come with the hard truth yet because you're going to throw me out and then you're going to miss it altogether. So learning how that is that balance, and then I still may have to pay some bills. So I still need to hold on to my job. Just learning how to balance that. I just think of how the wheat and the tares having to grow together. And it's such a balancing act. You have any suggestions on that?
Well, Precious, let me first honor the question and the energy and the spirit in which it was asked. I appreciate you. This is a conversation that I have often. Again, the title is The Black Professional Struggle Between Freedom and Security. I by no means have the solution because of all of the things you just factored. There's people who have mouths to feed, roof to keep over the head, lights to keep on, obligations, bills, I get it. And knowing that what we're going into on a day-to-day basis requires us to navigate every decision, every conversation, every email with a level of scrutiny that takes up so many valuable mind and mental resources, that to do that and still produce at top levels is a feat of sheer sorcery. So the question that I always ask is, how are you evaluating your relationship to work right now? And what I mean by that is, are you emotionally invested and connected to the work you're doing for the company that you don't own? Or are you leveraging your paycheck or the relationship with your employer as a venture capital backer for your own venture? Some people call those side hustles. I call them startups. It's no different than what most of these tech people have done, starting up the Googles, the Facebooks, the you name them, while being in another company, oftentimes having the networks to fund because of the relationships they've built. So are we examining every function within these organizations that we have access to understand how to operate our own venture, right? Are we building those relationships to look at who could we bring in to do our accounting, manage supply chain, figure out IT infrastructure, build HR departments for our ventures? Largely the answer is no, because we're very focused on that job description that we applied to. And then just to get in, right? We just wanted to get in. Once we get in, then we can show them how hard we work, then we'll be tapped. That's a premise that we've accepted. We need to start having different conversations and asking better questions within our own communities.
Thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Precious, for your question. That's real. That's real. And, I often say not everybody has the emotional capital to be able to take these things head on all the time. And we have to also respect that, because we have no idea what could cause triggers that could be harmful to people. And so, but I also do appreciate those that have the wherewithal to be those trailblazers and to name the hard things and expose them where they need to be. So a question has come in. Yeah, go for it, John.
Can I just make one last point, Precious? This is for you and everybody listening. A lot of times people will say to me, John, not everybody's built for entrepreneurship. And I say slightly different. Not everybody's taught to be entrepreneurs. We're taught to be employees. Entrepreneurship can be learned.
Yeah.
Small decisions can then make shifts for future generations. It may not be you, maybe 7 generations after you, but the mindset shifts are where that starts.
That's good. Really good. So a direct question came in that I want to honor right now. And the question is, when Black people try to make Black spaces, it seems to miss the mark. For example, Black Lives Matter caused an uproar, became anti-police, and the argument could be made it worked against us. Yet other movements by marginalized groups seem to be progressing better. Why is this? What are Black people perhaps missing or doing incorrectly?
So I have a very interesting take on, well, I think it's interesting. I don't want to be self-absorbed, on Black Lives Matter. And this comes back to language again. I'm gonna put 2 commonly heard phrases together, and I want you to tell me the difference. Black Lives Matter, stop Asian hate. What's the difference between those 2 statements?
Call to action.
It's specific, it's concrete, it's not subjective. What does it mean to matter? Who determines what matter means? Stop Asian hate is specific, it's concrete. We need to first, again, examine our relationship to language. Dr. Nika, you knew we'd had a point to talk about language. And I made a statement that was kind of jarring, in that Black folks at best have access to about 80% of the English language. It's 20% reserved for an ownership class, a leadership and power dominant class, that unless you grow up in proximity to, go to pedigreed institutions, or are pulled to the side and taught, you don't understand. If you go into the legal profession, and I'll say this and end it, when you look at the 21 or so Black CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, there's something you'll find interestingly in common with them. A lot of them were lawyers, right, who went to pedigreed Ivy League schools. 21 out of a total of over 1,800 in a 66-year period that Fortune 500 has captured these stats. And there's a common thread. Law is the language of risk mitigation and power. So when we say Black Lives Matter, okay, what does that mean? What outcome do you expect out of that? How does one express that you matter? Stop Asian hate is specific.
Mm-hmm.
Stop Black death. Stop
Mhm.
killing Black people. Specific, but not easy to absorb from a branding perspective.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot more we haven't touched yet.
You're so right about it. And I'm watching the time and I'm getting sad because it's winding down. Okay, I want to bring maybe another voice to the table. Who has a question or just some commentary that you would like to contribute to this podcast community? Feel free to raise your hand, or I see a hand raised. And so go for it. Go ahead and unmute yourself and share. Okay, someone has their hands raised. I can't get to it to see exactly who is, but feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself and just start sharing.
Derek, your hand was raised.
Okay, perfect. Hey, thanks for allowing me in this space, and I'll be very brief. I've enjoyed this conversation thoroughly, and I've been a very huge proponent of Black Lives Matter, been very involved in the movement. But one thing I'll say is what you just said, John, is that a lot of times we have conversations about when we say Black Lives Matter, I have to break it down to people and say, it's not an organization. It's me telling you that my life matters, just like everyone else's life matter. My education matters, my schooling matters, my children matter. And so when we talk about Black Lives Matter, you're right, we have to explicitly define what that means and what it looks like, because to you, you may be more concerned about health, while I may be more concerned about music. And so whatever that looks like, I agree with you 100% that we should definitely be defining what that means and what it looks like. So I appreciate you sharing that.
I appreciate you, Derek. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks, Derek. Derek is someone that's an activist in our local community. So appreciate you being here. Appreciate you sharing your comments. So let's see. I see another hand raised. And Precious, before I actually call on you, I just want to make sure that I leave space for anyone else that has not had a chance to speak yet. And if no one comes forward, then I will definitely spotlight you again.
I think John's mom, Robin, had something she wanted to say. She had her hand up.
No way. Oh, so,
Miss Robin.
Yes.
My first
That
fan.
was by accident that I raised my hand.
Oh,
You know, I was looking for
now. But you have the floor now. You have to share something with us. What a treat this is.
Well, in your next VodCast, I'd like you guys to unpack Black versus white psychology, where it stems from, how to differentiate, how do we recognize it, that sort of thing, because, you know, all this is kind of new to me, although I've been in the race for a long, actually, I take that back. I was out of the rat race for over 35 years. I decided I was not fit for corporate America, nor was it fit for me. But I did use the tools to utilize their resources and build not one, but two companies, which afforded me the opportunity to put my son through school, make sure he was well taken care of and spoiled. But aside from that, but you know, it's a choice. And I think the choice came because my mother was very entrepreneurial, very Renaissance for her time. Although she did work the 9 to 5 as a teacher in predominantly low income neighborhoods, teaching Black children. And I saw her struggle through it, raising 4 kids. My father died at a very early age of mine. So she raised 4 children. But she always had a side hustle. I mean, it was unheard of for women to have an auto detailing business or own a corner store or even paint and be an artist who sold their work. So growing up with that model and the fact that I always said I had a bad attitude, so I wasn't cut out for corporate America, because I always pointed out the injustices there. But I applaud what John is taking to the next level. I applaud what you guys as younger generation take to the next level. We went through the civil rights struggle and got complacent with the little scraps that they gave us. Mm-hmm. You guys are saying, I don't want a scrap, I want a piece of the pie. Oh, hell, I want the recipe to the pie, or I want to bake the pie.
Right.
So I appreciate what you guys are doing, and it gives me hope for a future for my grandkids, that it's going to be different for them somehow. And that's all I got to say. Thank you so much.
No, that was amazing. I think it's an incredible way to end with centering the voices of our Graham guest today. And so thank you so much, Miss Graham. And John, we're at the top of the hour, but what have we not talked about today? I know there's lots, but that you're feeling a lot of power and energy around that you want to leave this audience with. And then I also want to make sure that you close this out by sharing the next opportunity that each of us will have with LinkedIn audio.
For sure, for sure. No, first and foremost, thank you for the space. The energy and the spirit in which you've crafted and curated this conversation, Nika. It's been phenomenal. I appreciate and applaud all of the activity in the chat, everybody's energy and intention in this conversation. I would simply say, please get the book, Black Plantation Theory, the Black Professional Struggle Between Freedom and Security, not simply because I want you to buy the book, but more so because it's a conversation with your children. It's a conversation with your colleagues to really question premises and to start making small adjustments and decisions that can have generational impacts. With that, my next conversation is on LinkedIn audio, where we're talking for Black History Month about past, present, and future, the impacts of Brown versus the Board of Education, and how the current education state and the onslaught of CRT-based legislations, showcase how things have yet to move as far as we think.
Great, and it's happening right now at the top of the hour, so we're going to let you go so you can get on that conversation. We did share it into the chat, and I'm telling you, I hope you'll have a chance to go back and listen to, or at least read the comments in the chat, because so much great love for all of the information you shared, and they're telling me that I definitely have to bring you back. So John, I'm going to go ahead and extend the invite. Will you come back on a future date to share more?
Oh, without question.
Okay, fantastic, great.
Thank you.
Thank you all so very much. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next week for the next Intentional Conversations podcast.